Hi all! This module is about how people share what they know in groups, how information becomes common knowledge within a group, and how information spreads between people in different communication networks. So there are a few major ideas that are introduced in the textbook chapters and discussed in more detail in additional readings, and I'm just going to talk through those a little bit to help us get started with our module. Okay, so the first idea is that there are some different theories about how people decide what information to share in a group. Now, when I participate in a group, I bring a lot of knowledge with me. Everybody does. We all have knowledge and information, access to information that we bring with us to the group. But I don't just automatically say everything I know. It would like a big brain dump. Like if everyone was doing that in a group, it would be chaotic, right? So I make some decisions about what information to share and when I think it would be relevant to the group. This is we just have to do this. Otherwise there's confusion and too much information and we get sort of overloaded, right? So what happens in this decision-making process? That's something that group scholars are really interested in. And although this might seem counterintuitive, research has pretty consistently shown that people in a group are most likely to share information that is already known. We're more likely to say things that are consistent with what people are already talking about than we are likely to share information that is not been brought up or is different or deviates or kind of contradicts things that the group is already talking about. So in other words, we don't always share the best information. We tend to repeat what people are already saying instead of bringing in things that someone doesn't know. So this isn't great, obviously. It can really hinder groups from making well-informed decisions, and it can reinforce unhealthy power dynamics and group norms. So group scholars have been really interested in this and kind of puzzled and kind of raise a bunch of different kind of theoretical reasons or kind of research-based reasons about why this might be happening. So there may be some times when I decide not to share something because it seems like the group's already talking something else and I don't want to take us off topic. Or maybe I think, oh, people must already know this information and have already taken it into account because it seems obvious to me, but no one's brought it up, so maybe they've already thought through it. Or maybe the fact that no one else is sharing this information that I have makes me doubt myself. Is my information really relevant or correct? Like, how do I know? Right, so the textbook reading describes some different theories and information to share, explain this pattern. Wow. And as you're reading about information sharing, I encourage you to think about how you personally make decisions about what information to share in the group and how information becomes accepted or rejected in the groups that you participate in. So in your experience, what makes you more likely to share new information? What do you think makes other group members more likely to share information? And in the groups that you participate in, what are the norms around sharing information? Are there clear criteria for how to evaluate information and decide what's worth sharing? And of course, once information is shared, that doesn't necessarily mean that a group is going to accept that information, right? And use it, especially if it contradicts what we already know. We know that individuals tend to respond differently to information that's consistent with our beliefs than we do to information that challenges our beliefs, right? And of course that happens in groups and it can be even more complicated. So team cognition refers to the level of information that's commonly shared and expressed by group members. This varies over time as teams share more information and deepen their collective knowledge. But again, I think it's useful to think about our own experiences here, right? How do group members in your groups respond to information that's consistent with what the group already believes? Like, do people go like, oh yeah, for sure, that's accurate? Well, on the flip side, how do group members respond to information that contradicts what the group already believes or challenges taken for granted assumptions? Given what you know about task and relational communication, group norms, roles, diversity in groups, how could you help create a system in your groups where people are encouraged to share new information? How can you as a group member or leader promote high quality evaluation of this information so your group can make the best decision possible? We'll talk more in depth about decision making in subsequent modules, but even now you can think through this process a bit. So the other main idea in this module, in the readings for this module, is that we can map out communication patterns in a group and look at communication networks. So networks show who talks to whom and how information flows through a group. Scholars who study networks create these little images where they have, nodes, these little dots, right, that are connected by lines that show some sort of relationship. These are ties, these ties between the nodes. So these ties between people can be either strong or weak, right? They can vary in different ways. You can look at like formal networks of how information is supposed to flow by reporting structure. You can compare that to like the networks of how information actually flows, who actually talks to whom, right? So one way that we think about ties is whether they're strong or weak, right? Strong ties indicate that people have frequent communication, some sort of strong, consistent relationship, and they often share connections with a lot of the same people. Weak ties, on the other hand, show that people involved don't directly communicate with each other as often or have as many other connections in common. And weak ties are really important in a network because they can show places where communication can be strengthened, and they can also show people who kind of bridge between groups. So in a group setting, networks tend to either be centralized or decentralized, and those are two very different structures that make a difference in how the group functions. Groups where everyone talks to each other are decentralized, and they tend to be more democratic. But they can also lead to sort of information overload, right? In contrast, centralized groups are ones where everything goes through one person, like maybe the leader of the group all information goes to the leader and the leader sort of shares it out to everyone, but people are going like one at a time rather than speaking to everyone as a whole, right? So that has a host of other problems, right, in terms of faulty decision making and chance for information to get lost, or people not really understanding why decisions are being made the way they are. And networks can also show like how subgroups form. So when we think about networks, there's actually a large interdisciplinary group of scholars who study communication networks and explore things on a much larger scale, like within an organization or a community or even globally, right? Looking at how different groups connect to each other and how information travels between organizations or between specific branches of an organization or a political unit or across even social media networks, right? So for our purposes, that is, when looking at small groups, it's useful just to note that communication networks are a tool for looking at who's talking to whom and how information is shared. You can think about this for your own team. If you were to make a picture, like draw a picture that had a circle that represented each person in your group, and you drew lines between people to show their communication patterns, what would that show you about your group, right? What would you learn? Sometimes these kind of network diagrams can give us a visual image that show that there's someone being left out, right? Or who only gets information from one other team member. And that person might be someone you need to bring in more, right? Sometimes there are two distinct subgroups that don't talk to each other very much, and we might not have noticed it as much until we actually take time to observe and map out the communication. And also, these kind of networks can help us then maybe understand better some of the fault lines, as we've discussed in previous weeks when we were talking about sort of diversity, right? So these insights can help us better understand our information sharing and team cognition. They could inspire us to change our decision-making processes, right? So, as I said, we'll talk more about decision making in some of the upcoming modules, but for now, it's useful to consider what the communication patterns are like in your group and whether those patterns are working for you or not. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for your good work in the class. I look forward to your reflections this week.